After Israel attacked Damascus and Aleppo airports in Syria for the third time in a week last night, both airports are out of service. So Russia has decided to allow its Khmeimim air base in Latakia to be used in place of Damascus and Aleppo airports, even for Iranian military cargo flights. It was allegations by Israel that Iran was moving weapons into Syria, which would allegedly, at some later point, be used to attack Israel, that somehow justified Israel attacking Damascus and Aleppo airports. Now, what is Israel going to do? Will they dare try to attack a Russian airbase? The airbase has extensive air defenses. In fact, one NATO general said in 2015, the base has so much defense. We're seeing an A2/AD, anti-access/area denial airspace forming in the eastern Mediterranean. Does anyone care to mull the biblical aspect of what happens if Israel attacks that Russian airbase in Syria? As is well known, Israel has been launching what many call a forced displacement of Arabs living in the Gaza Strip. Almost non-stop bombing by Israeli fighter jets has already killed 4,000 Palestinians and destroyed over 10,500 housing units, as the Israeli Air Force drops bombs on apartment buildings to demolish them at the foundation. The Gaza Strip is also subjected to a siege by Israel, which for almost the past 2 weeks has forbid the entry of trucks carrying even food and water. It was just yesterday that Israel allowed 20 tractor trailers in, but none with fuel, which is desperately needed for hospital electric generators, since the Gaza Power Company ran out of fuel and can no longer generate electric 20 tractor trailers brought in what they could. But to feed a population of 2.3 million, at least 100 tractor trailers a day are necessary. So starvation is also on the table for folks in Gaza. Russia has called a total of 3 meetings of the UN Security Council over the Gaza situation. At one of those meetings, a draft resolution was put forth by Brazil for an immediate ceasefire, but the United States vetoed that resolution. What human garbage is the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations that she would veto a resolution for a ceasefire in a situation where civilians are being hit by fighter jets? So now that the Russians cannot seem to get even human behavior at the UN Security Council, they have just upped the ante to Armageddon for the U.S. and Israel. Russia is now opening Khmeimim Air Base to be used in place of Damascus and Aleppo airports, which also means Iran military cargo planes. If Israel hits that base, Russia will hit Israel in self-defense. Oh, wait. Maybe that's been the game plan all along? The U.S. has been trying to go to direct war with Russia over in Ukraine, but failed to achieve that. The U.S. supplied Abrams tanks, Mk-140 long-range HIMARS, millions of rounds of ammunition, hundreds of thousands of artillery shells. Even U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham said on television it's the best money he's spent. To kill Russians. Russia didn't take any of that bait. So now the U.S. seems ready to use Israel to hit the Russian air base, which would logically move us all directly into World War III. Maybe this is the real reason the U.S. put 2 aircraft carrier strike groups in the eastern Mediterranean Sea off Syria. Because maybe Russia has been their goal all along, and the Russian base at Latakia, Syria is right on the Mediterranean Sea, exposed to all the U.S. firepower. Now we also know why Russian President Vladimir Putin politely reminded everyone last week that his MiG-31 jets, patrolling the neutral airspace of the Black Sea, are armed with Kinzhal hypersonic missiles. Those missiles, he said, have a known range of 1,000 kilometers and travel at Mach 9. What he didn't say, but everyone figured out, was that those Russian fighter jets all the way up in the Black Sea can fire those Kinzhal missiles and hit the U.S. aircraft carriers all the way down in the Mediterranean Sea. While the Kinzhal can be armed with a conventional high explosive, it can also be armed with a tactical nuke of between 5 and 50 KT. Those missiles can sink both aircraft carriers and their strike groups. The missiles, if fired from the Black Sea, would take only 6 minutes to arrive in the Mediterranean Sea. Maybe this is why the crew of the USS Gerald R. Ford were fed a steak and lobster dinner last night. Story. Here I wondered aloud if the crew was actually being given a sort of last meal because the bosses knew they were all going to get killed. Now we might be seeing why those sailors and Marines got steaks and lobster last night. The bosses seem to have known they intended to use Israel to hit the Latakia airbase, which would beget a Russian military response, which would wipe out both aircraft carriers and their strike groups. The whole thing seems already planned. The Pentagon seems to have sent both aircraft carriers and their strike groups, knowing they intended to get them all killed, to start World War III, have it go nuclear, and thereby get out of the $33 trillion the U.S. owes around the world through after-war debt forgiveness. Game, set, match. I think it's all being done on purpose. Why send THAAD? In fact, upon more reflection, I think this is exactly why U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin announced he is sending THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense missiles, to the Middle East. The only thing THAAD is good for is intercepting intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, in their terminal phase, high up in the atmosphere. THAAD is useless for close-in missiles within 50 miles. So why send them to the Israel-Hamas conflict? I think they're sending THAAD because they know Israel is already going to hit the Russian airbase in Syria, maybe with a nuke, and that Russia will respond by nuking Israel. So they want THAAD up and running to try to defend against that. And if they cannot defend it and Russian nukes hit Israel, thankfully there's some really fertile land available in Eastern Europe, where almost all the men are already dead from war, which Israel could relocate to. Ukraine. Gee, how convenient. I was right. Here it is, an Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC cargo aircraft, landing at the Russian airbase, worst of all. With all the firepower in place, all the pieces lined up, the scenario I've outlined above can take place literally at any moment, maybe even this week. In a matter of a few short hours, the missiles could be on their way. I earnestly hope you have your emergency food, water, medicine, generator, fuel, and communications gear like a CB or ham radio. Looks like you're gonna need it all real soon.